Welcome to All Grown Up Now, a tale of retail, relocation, revenge, reinvention, reckless behavior, really good clothes, indiscretion, infidelity, domestic violence, and one kidnapping. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is another in a series of installments from a novel I wrote called All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts, available on Amazon.com. It's the story of a small-town boy who dreams of being a grown-up and his journey to get there. Each week, you'll hear another installment of this story. I am pleased to announce that BearWorldMagazine.com will be one of the sponsors of all of the episodes going forward. In the last episode, Ken and Matt move in together. Episode 12, Homicide is not a career path. The place, San Francisco. The time is late 1982. In the meantime, my gig at Roos Brothers was winding down. A few months after Mark was let go, there was a change in the top brass. The new guy was known in the retail industry as an undertaker, and believe me, he looked the part. The handwriting was on the wall, so I started scrambling to get another job in display and set my sights on Macy's. In the early 80s, Macy's California was the place to be in display, as it was regarded rightly as the top of the industry. There was a particular vision and the money to support it, and all the display queens wanted in. Mark suggested that I contact Bob Hartman. You remember, the consultant who had been the first to offer me cocaine, and while working at that, he still had connections with Macy's and could possibly get me the right person to talk to. Mark made the first call, and I followed up. Bob had talked to the human resources person in display for me. He also happened to be named Bob Williams. Auntie Bob, as we in display called him behind his back, was one of those queens of a certain very old age who permed his thinning, obviously dyed hair and wore leather trousers with his Armani jacket. He sounded like a hefty bag when he walked. Leather trousers on a saggy, deflated ass will do that. But what did I really think of him? Mr. Williams and I would be meeting at a bar in the financial district called Sutter's Mill. Auntie Bob held court every evening at Sutter's Mill, and was also reputed to do the casting couch routine. I never got to the casting couch. I must not have been his type, thank God. Yuck. So when he hired me, I was relegated to the Pleasanton or Siberia store. Rumor had it that the downtown display crew was pulled from the casting couch ranks. Taking this job in Pleasanton meant an hour-long drive each way. My new boss at the Pleasanton store was named Carmel Dole. He claimed that he was part of the Dole pineapple fortune, but I never saw any evidence of that. He also claimed that English was his first language. He was born in Hong Kong, but I never saw any evidence of that either. Before I met Carmel, I thought the name sounded real classy, like Carmel Snow at Harper's Bazaar in the 50s. The reality of Carmel was drastically different. Carmel was a pear-shaped, pockmarked man with bad haircut, flat ass, bad clothes, horrible taste, really bad teeth, and disgusting table manners. And he was also crazy. And also gay. I desperately didn't want him on our team. Combine this with an accent that made most of what he said unintelligible, and I had the recipe for the work situation from hell. Thankfully, I worked with 2 really funny guys, Loren and Craig. Craig was dark-haired and silent and slyly funny. Loren was tall, sandy-haired, and larger than life. They both were really good display trimmers, and I learned quite a bit from them. It was here at Macy's, under their watchful and sometimes bitchy eyes, that I learned the craft of display. Thankfully, I had my own skill set, gleaned from my upbringing as the son of do-it-yourselfers, but when they got done with me, I was a fully accredited member of the trimmer ranks. From them, I learned how to mix paint to match a color. From them, I learned how to do a mean painted finish. Loren taught me the finer points of composition as it relates to display, and how displays that will be viewed from all sides have to be composed differently than those viewed from one angle, such as a display window. He also taught me how to cut hair, and how cutting a mannequin wig is different from cutting hair on a head. Wig hair goes on in rows, so layering is more problematic. Cut the wrong way, and instead of a smooth effect, you got what looked like shingles. Craig was the one who taught me the concept of overstatement, that if one did a display that someone might have in his own home, the point of buying more merchandise might be lost. If the display overstated, either fashion-wise or in home furnishings, it would look more glamorous or appealing than what the customer had already. That was the point, to romance the merchandise, as he would say, to make it desirable and wanted. They both also emphasized the idea of having a customer in mind when making a display. Know what this customer did, where the customer went, what events, restaurants, social gatherings she attended, to have a picture of who she was. For example, a customer who went to the country club for lunch wouldn't wear certain things, like budget jewelry or white high heels. We even had names for some of the mannequins, and certain ones didn't do the budget dress department. Others, less glamorous, would get duty in the maternity section after being stuffed with a pillow. Some of what I learned from Loren and Craig was about display, but the most necessary skill I developed was being able to think on my feet and get off as many good lines as they could. And Loren and Craig were really good at that, so I had to work hard. My first success in the one-liner department came one day while Loren was talking to the manager of cosmetics, Evelina. She was scolding Loren for not taking as much time as she felt necessary in her department. When dressing down people, she could get wrought up into an operatic frenzy, which she was building up to in this particular tirade. When it appeared that Evelina was just about to break into her aria, I interrupted and said to Loren, "Oh, never mind her. She just found out that her upper arms don't fit into puff sleeves anymore." Both of them stopped and stared at me, stunned. They had never heard that kind of comment from me before. It was Evelina who spoke first. She glared at me for a few moments, and then broke into a big smile. "That was good," she laughed. "You're going to get along fine here." Oh, along with learning how to dish, I also got a new name, Muriel. Loren was Donna Louise, and Craig was just Craig. We needed one Butch. Let me take a minute to introduce you to Evelina. Evelina looked like Irma Bombeck and talked like Joan Rivers and walked around the cosmetics department in pink fuzzy slippers. She was manic and ruled the cosmetics department from her office right off the cosmetics floor, where she consumed gallons of iced tea. She could get lathered up in a flash, just about anything you just couldn't predict. Then she'd be on a rant for hours. I was walking by her office one day and caught a couple of her sales ladies at her desk stirring the tumbler of iced tea. They looked up guiltily. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Giving Evelina her Valium," one of them said quietly. "No way." "Yes," the other one said. "Sometimes we just can't take it. Come back in an hour." I stopped by a little while later, just out of curiosity. Evelina was sitting at her desk, the iced tea gone, and she was staring off into space. "Hey, Evelina," I said. "Hello," she cooed fuzzily. "What's up?" "Nothing," she cooed, smiling dreamily, staring off into space. I walked back into the cosmetics department, and one of the gals caught my gaze and raised an eyebrow, as if to say, "See?" We never drugged Carmel, though. I couldn't get my hands on any Valium. The three of us banded together to cope with Carmel, whose work habits were, shall we say, erratic. Carmel would show up about 11 o'clock after offering up one excuse or another. Craig always said that Carmel's lover tied him up each night before bed, and it would take until mid-morning for Carmel to chew through the ropes. I disagreed with that theory, arguing that if Carmel were indeed chewing rope so frequently, his teeth wouldn't be so fuzzy. If he wanted to get a particular project done, We came in really early and tried to be done before Carmel got there. Work ground to a halt when he arrived, and only got up to a snail's pace after that, what with Carmel's interfering. It galled him to think we could actually produce, and quickly, without him. There were many occasions where Carmel would slam on the brakes if he came in and found us mid-project, and several times he had us completely undo what he had done and start over. Once Carmel arrived, we would have to stop and take a break with him so he could, quote-unquote, give us our instructions for the day. This usually involved us watching him eat a bagel with cream cheese and peanut butter, and then loudly slurp down a tall glass of hot tea. He chewed loudly and talked with his mouth full, so we would have to dodge the bits of food that would spew out of his mouth as he talked. The peanut butter and cream cheese would also add another layer of fuzz to his teeth. At first, I was oblivious to what Carmel was saying, as I couldn't make out a word of it. For the first 3 months, Carmel would yell at me because I couldn't follow directions, but I wouldn't just come out and say that I couldn't understand what he was saying. Then one day, Carmel was talking, and I understood. It was what I imagine it's like when one is learning a foreign language, and first understands it without trying to translate into one's native tongue. Loren noticed the expression on my face. He pulled me off to the side and hissed in true women's prison film style, "You're one of us now, Muriel." For better or worse, I knew I had arrived. Speaking of the language barrier, Donna Louise, Craig, and I developed the Carmel Dole Unabridged Dictionary of the English Language. It was for the new people who might come after us, so they could learn that particular dialect instead of puzzling it out as we had done. Here are a few entries culled from the section on Christmas trim. Treem. 1. Noun, singular. Generic term for objects used by the display people to make a display or parts of a display. Plural, treems. 2. Verb. The act of assembling or otherwise arranging a display, as in, he is treeming the Christmas tree. Bee lice. Noun, singular and plural. Electric cord, usually green in color, with tiny, clear glass bulbs attached. When plugged into an electrical source, the electricity causes the bulbs to glow brightly. In the business, they're called bee lights. Such a pretty treem. Browse. Noun, singular. These objects were made of metal and green plastic and designed to mimic pine tree branches. Plural, browses. Browses were usually put into pots with bee lice and other Christmas treem, used to treem doorways or archways, or otherwise spiff up the place in a holiday sort of way. Bouse. Noun, singular. These objects were usually made of red velvet or satin ribbon, and were usually tied onto the browses or the reeves, see below. They could also be attached to boxes that would have been covered with festive holiday paper to mimic gift boxes. Plural, bouses. Not to be confused with blouses. That's the ladies' garments. Plop. Noun, singular. Non-merchandise objects used to enhance displays. These could be anything from silk flowers to the too gross of plastic doll arms Carmel bought for the cheap. Plural, plopses. Reeve. Noun, singular. These round, large, donut-shaped objects are usually made up of browses attached to a styrofoam base and treemed with bouses and other treems. They usually had bee lice on them as well. Plural, reeves. Not to be confused with Christopher Reeves, the actor. When we were packing up the Christmas tree and plopses after the season, we got temp workers to do some of the heavy lifting. The temp workers we got that first year I worked at Macy's were the living inspiration for the cartoon characters Beavis and Butthead. Donna Louise had given them the Cliff Notes translation of this portion of our dictionary, feeling it was her duty to help them understand some of what was being said. As Beavis and Butthead were packing up all the treems, they used the Carmel Dole dictionary spelling for labeling the cartons, which Carmel thought tremendously funny. He was laughing at them for their stupid spelling because he didn't realize the joke was on him. While living with Matt, I got to meet his family. The first foray into dealing with the in-laws was a visit his parents undertook, driving in a camper from Texas to San Francisco. When they called and told us of the impending visit, Matthew told me that they said they would be here Thursday. I, of course, interpreted this to mean the upcoming Thursday, a logical assumption, and commenced an affairs of state house cleaning just to make a good impression. Thursday came and went, then Friday, and the weekend. By Sunday evening, after being on receive all that time, I became exasperated and insisted that he call the highway patrol. I reasoned that something bad must have happened to make them that late. Monday evening, the parents called to tell us that the highway patrol had indeed contacted them and that they were arriving in a couple of days. When I questioned Matt about this, he seemed unconcerned and not a bit surprised. They said they were coming on a Thursday, he replied. Well, you neglected to make this tiny but very important distinction. When my family says they are arriving on Thursday, they mean the upcoming Thursday. Most people would make the same assumption, I said. So I stopped staying home waiting and arrived back from the opera house one evening, it was a Friday actually, to find Matt's mother drinking tea at the dining room table. We got along fine, but she herself didn't see why I insisted that Matt call the highway patrol. They said they were coming on a Thursday. I just let the matter drop. During this visit, I won his mother's everlasting affection when I gave her a really fabulous haircut. She needed one and wanted to get it cut in San Francisco, so she asked Matt to recommend someone, and he recommended me. The results were so successful that a couple months later, she sent Matt a wig and asked him to ask me to give it the same haircut and style, and then ship it back packed up so it wouldn't get messed up. It seems she wanted her hairdresser to see what I'd done to learn from it. As for travel or other social arrangements, Matt's siblings were similarly inclined to be laissez-faire about dates and commitments. One Thanksgiving, after we'd been together a couple of years, I got it in my head to actually cook Thanksgiving dinner. We thought we might invite his brother Joseph and his, wife, George, who I really enjoyed. George was always such a girl that I referred to him as my sister-in-law. The wife thing became an actual fact several years later when George became Georgette, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I also wanted to invite Matt's sister Frances and her homophobic jerk husband David, who both lived in Livermore. Before I did, however, I called Joseph and George and asked if they would both be comfortable, as David was really a homophobic jerk husband. Both assured me they would be okay with all of this, so I extended the invite to Frances and David. When Matt and I arrived home from the grocery store with the turkey and all the trimmings, there were 2 messages on the answering machine. You can see where this is going. It would be just Matt and me at dinner. Exasperated, I yelled at Matt about your family and made him put the groceries away while I sat on the sofa and called Mark to commiserate. We were talking when from the kitchen I heard a loud... It sounded like my electric saw. Uh-oh, I gotta go, Mark. He's up to something in the kitchen, and it sounds like it involves power tools, I said as I walked into the kitchen. It was my electric saw. Matt was attempting to saw the frozen turkey in half with my electric saber saw. What the hell are you doing? I shouted over the din. Stop that! That's when he patiently explained that he was sawing the turkey in half so we could cook half and freeze half. I'm not too expert in the kitchen. One must choose which room to be good in, but even I knew that we could cook the whole bird and freeze what we didn't eat. So the one and only turkey I ever cooked had a terrible chest wound. For someone who had an IQ of 140, although I never saw documentation of the fact, Matt could be amazingly dim. As it was, work was driving me crazy. I was spending all my waking time either obsessing about the crazy boss or working with him. Looking back, it was a blessing in disguise, as it forced me to remember what Ray Probst at Dillard's had said before I left OKC. You remember, to get out of retail as soon as possible. I realized that if I were to stay at Macy's, I would be working for crazy people like Carmel forever. Also, looking at the situation in the high offices, where the courtiers' ass-kissing and office politics recalled Versailles during the reign of the Sun King, I surmised that there were only a limited number of positions, and the people holding on to them were hanging on for dear life. Besides, it galled me that anything I created was property of someone else, in other words, Macy's. It's called work for hire in the artistic fields. This was the situation when working in window display. If you do good work, the main guy in display gets to claim it. If the main guy hates it, you get in trouble for doing it. All of this aside, I was having fun working with Loren and Craig. Being in display was a great job and provided opportunities for fun with fashion and props. One series we started was the cocktail hats made from the dust masks. It was the perfect base to work with, a little cup shape and an elastic to hold it on the head. In the display shop, we had a case of the dust masks, supposedly to protect us if we worked on something dusty. Nowadays, there's a sticker on these masks that says, "This mask will not protect your lungs. Misuse may result in either sickness or death." Back then, even with no warning stickers, we knew they were worthless. So, we made cocktail hats from them. Every spring and fall, there was a new line, and if someone was having a birthday or a promotion, they got a cocktail hat. It was all for a laugh and great fun, and where the idea to make hats actually came from. The best part of the fun was tormenting Carmel, who had high blood pressure and could get quite wrought up about us wasting money on such foolishness. Unfortunately for us, though, we couldn't get him wrought up enough to bring on the stroke. We hated him that badly. We once had an opportunity to kill Carmel and make it look like an accident. It would have involved him falling several stories to smash against the marble floor, and we almost did it. But since homicide is not a career path, and I believe in reincarnation and don't want to cross Carmel's path again, we decided to let Carmel live. After that, though, the three of us embarked on a program of injuring him whenever the opportunity presented itself. There was a period when Carmel was always either wearing an ace bandage or using a cane, and he would remark on how accident-prone we had become. But homicide is not a career path. Loren steered Carmel into a manhole once while dragging around Christmas trim. Since Carmel was walking backward, Loren, who had seen the hole with the cover off, steered him until he just dropped in, just like in the comics. Then Loren feigned surprise and let Carmel stew down there while he went for help. After a refreshing coffee, we finally got around to hauling Carmel out of the hole. My favorite, though, was dropping a fully loaded china cabinet over on him. I had it pulled out from the wall, Carmel walked behind it, and oops, it tipped over. How did that happen? It pinned him to the wall, blackening an eye and cracking some ribs. The explosion of crashing glass and china was really gratifying. Well, he was making our days miserable. Tit for tat. In the spring of 1983, my car dropped a transmission. Since the car was kaput, I had to take public transportation to Pleasanton, making the commute 2 hours each way. Since I wasn't making that much money, as Macy's was a prestige job, but Trimmers at the Emporium, which was the down-market department store in the Bay Area, made more, I had a problem scaring up the dough to get the car fixed. Right about that time, Mark came through with Mrs. Timms. She was Gordon's mom and had lots of money. Let me back up a bit and introduce you to Gordon and Mrs. Timms. Gordon was a spoiled, rich kid monster who was my age, which was 26 at the time. He met Mark and Vic at a bathhouse in Austin, Texas, and became their ward, so to speak. My understanding of the situation was that he had a big dick, and that was all Vic was really interested in. So that's why he became their ward, so Vic could blow him and Mark could get him out of trouble. Gordon had a lot of money, but no brain to speak of. He didn't have to have one. Other people functioned as his brain, Mark being the more recent recruit. Gordon moved from Austin to San Francisco just to be with Mark and Vic. When Matt and I met Gordon for the first time, it was at a bar called the Café San Marcos in the Castro. It was an upstairs and upscale bar with a stainless steel and brass floor, clear acrylic bar stools upholstered in brown leather, deep club chairs upholstered in taupe ultra suede, lots of smoked glass mirror on the walls, and pin spots on the very arty floral arrangements of exotic tropical flowers, bird of paradise being the prominent one. This was 1983. And it had a dress code. You know the kind of place. Anyway, we were there to meet Mark, Vic, and Gordon. Matt wasn't a fashion queen by any stretch of the imagination, so I had done my best to dress him in the least geeky outfit I could cobble together from his limited wardrobe, supplemented with some of my own accessories. We arrived first. They all came in a few minutes later and sat down. Matt and I were stunned into silence by Gordon's appearance. Gordon was wearing a dark, dull blue silk shirt, open to the waist, and dark trousers and shoes. The open shirt revealed some gold chains in his chest hair. Any of these chains could have been used to tow a car out of a ditch. This was not hip-hop. It was late Tom Jones. His hair, which I believe was naturally a strawberry blonde, was wildly and very artificially streaked with red and yellow blonde. But the makeup... Mark told me that Gordon bought the Erno Laszlo makeup tester setup they normally use at sales counters in the department stores and would take at least 2 hours to put on his face. This was in the time before Tammy Faye Baker became known for her makeup abuse, and I sincerely believe Gordon got there first. Tammy Faye was a follower. Poor Matt. He'd never seen anything like this before. He kept whispering to me questions like, "Is that gold and green on his eyes?" which I thought was a little bit hilarious, because Matt was colorblind, but I still got the point. Gordon could well afford to spend so much time working on his maquillage. He didn't have to work, really. He had a job, one his daddy got for him at Bechtel, but I think his boss decided that Gordon didn't really need to actually come into work. It was easier just to send him the check, which usually went up his nose. On to Mrs. Thames. Mrs. Thames married Mr. Thames, but it was Mrs. Thames who had the money, as the story was told to me. Mr. Thames worked for Aramco and Bechtel, doing God knows what. They had loads of money, so they didn't have to raise or otherwise deal with Gordon. They just threw money at him, and things seemed to take care of themselves. I met Mrs. Thames on one of her trips to San Francisco. Mrs. Thames was seeing an oral surgeon about a tooth problem. The Mr. and Mrs. seemed to have a weird relationship. I remember Mark telling me that, at a party one evening, Mrs. Thames got drunk and loudly reminded Mr. Thames in front of a bunch of other people that he had married up when he married her, not the other way around. So, after the party, he put her in the car. Then he got in behind the wheel. He fastened his safety belt, and then crashed the car into a wall, throwing Mrs. Thames through the windshield. Hence her tooth problem. Small wonder Gordon was such a mess. And a mess he was. One of the other things Mrs. Thames was dealing with on this particular visit to San Francisco was Gordon's facelift. Yes, facelift. At age 26. And his bills. It seems she was funding the apartment, the car, a credit card, and the charge account at Wilkes-Bashford. Gordon wouldn't actually wear clothes that had been dry cleaned. He would throw out the dirty clothes and go buy some new ones. And Mark would bundle the worn ones into hefty bags and put them at the curb. Gordon had such wretched taste that Mark knew not to offer them to me. Anyway, it seems that, while she was in town dealing with Gordon's facelift, his bills, and her tooth problem, Mrs. Thames wanted to find a dress to wear to her daughter's wedding. Mark saw an opening and suggested that I could design something for her and got us together. Thankfully, he briefed me about all of their combined mishigas before I met them. I'd like to think I have a poker face and can roll with the punches, but Mark figured out that this might be a little too far out of my depth to be dropped into without some preparation. As work proceeded, I did hear about Mrs. Thames' tooth problem, as well as Gordon's facelift during fittings. His complaint was he couldn't move his eyebrows. What a surprise. There were other mumblings of having people dealt with and such. That all made me nervous that I might not be able to design her a dress that she was happy with, and what might happen to me if I didn't. But to make a long story short, I did the dress, she was happy, I got paid, I got my car fixed, and the course of my career changed, all in one little deal. So twice in our friendship, Mark had played midwife of sorts for my career and by extension my path in life. First, by getting me out of OKC, and now showing me by providing my first customer that I could earn money by designing clothes. And happily, I never saw Gordon ever again. He eventually moved to Southern California to be with Mark and Vic, and after a time, he up and moved to the Netherlands, go figure. For my birthday in 1983, I went to have a tarot reading at this place called Amron Metaphysical Center. The woman who did the reading was named Norma. It was she who founded the place, which was a church of sorts, as well as a bookstore for books on the subjects of metaphysics. They also sold crystals, wands, and all of the other kind of thing that all the New Agers went for. When I went into her office for the reading, I had a big chip on my shoulder. I had had another reading a while before, and the guy was a total fake. He kept harping on how I wasn't really gay, talk about clueless. My friends say that there are two things we can see in those satellite photos from space: the Great Wall of China, and that Ken is gay. Norma began by giving me a running inventory of what was happening in my life with specific details of times, places, and what people looked like. She floored me by asking, "So what is this about the dress for the wedding?" She then paused and said, "Have I established my credibility yet? Can we now get to work without the attitude?" She had me there, and I immediately liked and trusted her. One major question I had was about Mrs. Thames and the dress, and what did it all mean? Norma told me that this dress was the beginning, that I wouldn't have any more business from her, but this gig set me onto the path I needed to be on. And, as the years passed, Norma was the one to prod me on, urging me to go further on this path, and finally to quit my job and start my business. She took on the role of mothering and called me Sweetie. One day, years later, when we were out to dinner together, the waiter asked her if I was her son. Without skipping a beat, she smiled at him and said quietly, "Why, yes, he is." I will always be grateful to her and love her forever. The two people I remember asking about at that first reading were Matt and Mark. As for Matt, she told me that he would be in my life for a while, but we wouldn't grow old together. He wasn't the one. But it would be fun while it hung together. Mark, however, was a different story. "You and Mark knew each other in ancient Rome," Norma said. "You were a page boy, and he was a general. He was desperately in love with you, but you were just having fun. You shared some other past lives, but the common theme here was that he was always the older one with the power, and you were always the creative one. That has carried over into this lifetime. This contact with the dress and the lady is part of that karma." She continued, "Know that there will come a time when this will all change. Now he has the power, and with that power comes a degree of control. But one day, he will come to you in a much more humble position, and you will be the one with the power. Once this happens, the karma from the past lives will be dealt with, and your friendship will be on a more equal footing." Fast forward to the airplane in April of 1995. As I was flying to Los Angeles to kidnap Mark, I reflected on this prediction of Norma's. There was a time that, even a couple weeks earlier, I would have said that she got it wrong. But here I was, heading down to LA to kidnap Mark. Uncanny. In the next episode, Ken takes steps to start a new business. In the meantime, Victor drags Mark to Southern California. Thanks for listening. I'd like to thank BearWorldMagazine.com for sponsoring this podcast. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me through the website, which is allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, KennethDKing.com.